join me in prayer? To our eternal commander, we will never forget where we were on 11 September 2001, when we heard of the tragic attacks on the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and Flight 93. We will never forget when the towers fell and the lives of Americans were lost. We will never forget the images of dust and smoke. We will never forget our collective feeling of vulnerability, shock, and disbelief. We will never forget the numbness that flooded our emotions as we watched our screens for hours, wondering, how could this happen? While we will never forget, invoke within us the spirit of service before self that matches those first responders at Ground Zero who rushed into danger to help others. Allow the words, "let's roll," to fuel our drive in managing the complexities of the incomprehensible, so that we may honor those who rose to overwhelm those who held death in their hands. May the anchor of hope stabilize our hearts and minds as we still manage the wake of emotional wounds and chronic hurt. Amid tragedy and disaster, we will never forget the images of old glory. We will never forget the patriotism that bound our nation together as we clawed our way from desperation to restoration. As we stand on the hallowed grounds of America's airfield, may the words, "I am a warrior," posture our hearts and minds to never forget our veterans who answered their nation's call 20 years ago. For we hold these truths to be self-evident, that what is torn down, we rebuild, and that which is broken, we repair. May the sounds of freedom and the projection of air power remind us today, perfection is our standard, and it is fueled by pressing excellence. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, First Responder Honor Guard and Chaplain Blancaflor. We are gathered here this morning to reflect on the tragic events that our nation suffered on the morning of September 11, 2001. Please focus your attention to the formation of first responders, comprised of military and civilian personnel, as they memorialize those events that occurred on September the 11th. At 0846 on September 11, 2001, American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. At 0903 on September 11, 2001, United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. These coordinated attacks killed 2,606 people in both the North and South Towers and 147 passengers and crew on the two airliners. At 0937 on September 11, 2001, American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, killing 125 Pentagon personnel and 59 passengers and crew on board the airliner. At 10:03 on September 11, 2001, due to the heroic efforts of passengers on board, United Airlines Flight 93, headed for a target in Washington, D.C., crashed in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, well short of its intended target, killing all 40 passengers and crew on board. In total, almost 3,000 innocent lives were lost as a result of those attacks. We will now observe a moment of silence to reflect on the tragedy of that day, followed by the playing of Amazing Grace by Master Sergeant Adam Tianello from the Air Force Band. Thank you, Master Sergeant Tinello. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 316th Wing and Joint Base Andrews Commander, Colonel Tyler Schaff.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we remember the lives lost in the tragic 9/11 attacks on our soil. For 20 years, memories of that day have united us. We've relived the horror and anguish of each image from that day for 2 whole decades. Together we remember not only the pain and suffering caused by the event, but also the display of resiliency and hope that it provoked. I'd like to welcome our leaders here at Joint Base Andrews, our community leaders, our Andrews ambassadors, our honorary commanders, our mission partners who played such an important role during 9/11 and beyond. Thank you for being here today to share in our reflection. In the span of just 102 minutes, our country lost more citizens than were lost in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Although time has passed, the memories do not fade. We remember the images of fire, the final call of loved ones, and the courage of rescuers who saw death and did not flee. We will never forget the 2,977 people who lost their lives on September 11th. Each individual was a family member. They were a friend, a coworker, and a life. We remember those who still wear the physical and emotional scars that serve as reminders of this tragic day. Because of this fateful day, a great number of you joined the military, responding with extraordinary acts of strength and valor, power, and selflessness. We will never forget the uniform and the civilians, the firefighters, the police officers, the medics, who rushed towards the rubble and the smoke to those who were injured, towards a grieving country, and all in an attempt to save thousands of innocent lives. By reflecting on the event, we honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our sake. The obligation of appreciation that we owe these people can never be forgotten. The dedication to our nation will always remain ingrained in our minds and the most paramount display of heroism that could ever be scribed in American history. Thank you to the Prince George's County Police Department, Prince George's Fire Department, to all of our first responders here at Joint Base Andrews, our medics, our fire department, our defenders. Thank you for running towards danger instead of running away from it. Every single person in the world can recall what they were doing when 9/11 attack happened. I was deployed to Prince Sultan Base in Saudi Arabia. Within a week, we became the Combined Air Operations Center where the air war was persecuted from. My wife Ellen worked in flight medicine at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, where they deployed brave pilots, maintainers, and support personnel within days to carry a message from the American people. Our individual memories and experiences cemented different backgrounds together, united us in a way that brought light to an agonizing feeling that still burns inside of me. On the 20th anniversary of 9/11 terrorist attacks, we as a military and a nation remain resilient. As we gather to remember September 11th, 2001, we remember those who lost their lives on that day and acknowledge that our lives and our nation will never be the same. And throughout time, we will continue to honor these memories by completing our duties as citizens of this great nation. I'm delighted today that we're joined by 2 very special people with relevant personal stories to tell. Our first speaker today is the 12th Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau, Lieutenant General Marc Sasseville. In this position, he is the second in charge of the National Guard Bureau. On September 11, 2001, Lieutenant General Sasseville was the acting Operations Group Commander in the 113th Wing of the DC Air National Guard. Today, we are so honored to have General Sasseville with us to share his experience during 9/11. Please join me in welcoming him back to Joint Andrews with a round of applause.
Thank you, Colonel Schaff. Good morning. I'm honored to join you for today's solemn remembrance ceremony. It is hard to believe that 20 years have passed. On that fateful day 2 decades ago, as we all know, the world was changed suddenly, completely, violently. 2,977 Americans lost their lives in an unprecedented attack of terrorism. There are airmen in our ranks today who do not remember that bright and cruelly beautiful Tuesday morning much as it is today. But I remember. I was there. Or rather, I was here, as were some of you in the audience today. When the first aircraft crashed into the World Trade Center in Manhattan, many believed it was an accident. But when the second plane crashed into the second tower, we all knew it was on purpose. Once we fully grasped what had happened, and after communicating with key mission partners, we knew that we needed to get into the air as soon as possible. I had visions of December 7th, 1941 flashing through my head. My wingman and I had no idea what we were flying into. We didn't know if the attack was over or if there were more airliners headed towards even more targets. But we did know that we had a team behind us. From the outstanding air traffic control professionals in Washington Tower, helping build us an air pitcher, to the logisticians back at Andrews getting supplies ready for issue. At the time, we didn't train to shoot down airliners, and our maintenance team didn't yet have time to load weapons on our F-16s. For the next several days, ours was a mission with one objective: bring any hostile aircraft down by any means necessary. Ultimately, we did not have to aim our fighters at the weak spots on an airliner or shoot down a plane full of civilians. While we do not know which monument or entity of our republic was the intended target, it may have been the White House, it may have been the Capitol. Flight 93 was the only hijacked aircraft that did not meet its terroristic objective. In the skies over Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the passengers and crew of United 93 fought back against the terrorist hijackers. They too understood their mission was to bring down the airliner by any means necessary. And so they did. And they are the true heroes of that chapter. It was upon landing after my first sortie of the day that I began to understand the enormity of the task ahead. I began to appreciate the activity and support that would unfold and define the next few months. Despite, or perhaps because of our collective horror, everyone played a role. First responders from every local and state jurisdiction were committed, to include law enforcement, firefighters, and rescue professionals. I see some of you in the audience today. You have my enduring gratitude. There were civil engineers and base operators that adjusted priorities here on this very air patch to accommodate us and our new mission, as well as the other partner units that were also looking at new taskings. There were the security forces of the 89th Wing, at that time the host wing, who had the space locked down and worked overtime to help our alert crews get access on base in a timely manner. At the time, with a change in FPCON, it could take an hour to get on base. Right here in Prince George's County, businesses and members of the public were beyond generous with their contributions and donations. Our 201st Airlift Squadron was flying around the continental United States to collect pilots and bring them back to Andrews so they could fly the combat air patrol missions as well. Our Air National Guard headquarters, the Readiness Center, went into overdrive and began issuing orders and coordinating overseas taskings. There are too many stories to share them all today, but the bottom line is that countless people and organizations came together in the darkest moments of our nation. I couldn't be prouder of how my unit, the 121st Fighter Squadron, and our 113th responded that day. Looking back, I'm just as proud of every National Guard unit across America that responded in some way. I'm proud of the fact that the entire Department of Defense, this very base, and other parts of our government reacted. Our local and state authorities executed, their response options. Never in my lifetime had we been so united and focused as a nation. It was a tremendous experience and a unique era. There have been significant changes over the past 20 years. In addition to those nearly 3,000 deaths, approximately 7,052 service members of the Joint Force would pay the ultimate price. But because of the hard work, pain, suffering, and even more hard work by those in uniform, our civilians in DoD and the interagency, and our partners and allies, there has not been another significant attack on U.S. soil. Tomorrow marks 20 years since the towers fell, since the Pentagon burned, since the Flight 93 passengers uttered the words, "Let's roll." For many, the decades have muffled the sounds of the collapse, the screams of terror, the choke of disbelief. The youngest members of our armed forces were not yet born on that catastrophic day. Yet their very presence demonstrates the triumph of hope over fear and the promise of tomorrow over the scars of yesterday. They are proof our nation and its people can endure even the darkest hours. But for those of you who were here then, I encourage you to spend some time with each other. Remember what you overcame. And for those who experienced 9/11 in other locations, share your experience too. And finally, those of you who aren't on the planet yet, or too young to remember that day, listen, so you can know your history. We remember 9/11. Remember the people who ran towards the rubble. We remember holding our loved ones a little tighter that evening, and remember thinking of the thousands who would never hold their loved ones again. We remember why we do our jobs, to defend this nation and its people. When we show up to work, when we drive through those gates, we do not know where the day will take us or what we will be asked to do. All we know is that we must be ready for anything, even the unthinkable. Our homeland is not a sanctuary, and it hasn't been for quite some time. The challenge to you, the next generation, and especially those of you interested in leading us, in or out of uniform, is to be vigilant and clear-eyed about the threats to America. Hold on to our principles and values, and be ready for the next attack, no matter where it comes from or how it arrives. The challenge is to make sure we don't suffer from the same complacency and failure of imagination. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and share a story of that day. Most of all, let us remember and always honor those who cannot share their stories. Never forget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant General Sasseville, for your valuable words and for sharing your story. Our last speaker this morning is someone who rose to the challenge on September 11th, 2001. He was the first helicopter squadron director of operations, retired Colonel Chuck Ennis. That day, Mr. Ennis made a vow to guide his squadron of both military and civilian professionals with expeditious response to the attacks. He is currently fulfilling his role as a corporate strategist for the Northrop Grumman Corporation. Mr. Ennis extends his distinguished work in numerous capacities. Mr. Chuck Ennis, Joint Base Andrews welcomes you back today and is very thankful for your presence.
Tomorrow, the day almost exactly like today, maybe with the exception of the wind. The skies were blue, it was a perfect temperature, it was a great day for flying. We at the first helicopter squadron at the other end of the ramp here, we were out with 3 aircraft that day, office and told me that a plane had hit the World Trade Center tower. And I went up to the mission control desk and watched the TV. There were reports coming in that it was a small plane or maybe a commuter plane that inadvertently hit the tower. What we were seeing on the TV, it didn't appear to be a small plane. And as Lieutenant Colonel Doug White and I sat there watching the TV, the second aircraft hit the tower. At that point, we both knew that we were under attack and that we needed to respond, and we needed to be ready to execute our operations plans. We had the 3 aircraft that were out. Lieutenant Colonel White stayed in control of the desk there. He recalled the aircraft. One of them was out in Martinsburg, West Virginia area. The other 2 were flying around the National Capital Region. And they all began to come back. We huddled the rest of the team that was there in the squadron, both the operators and the maintenance people, and got them in the briefing room, and we began to decide how we were going to prepare to get every aircraft that we could out of the hangar on the flight line and run up, cocked and ready to do its mission. We started to assign crews, and within several hours we had 15 aircraft of the 19 that we had on the flight line, cocked and ready to go with crews assigned and ready to do the mission. Of the 3 aircraft that were out flying, the one that was furthest out, as he came back in, he avoided the downtown area, but he came around on the southwest side of the city, and he reported that he could see smoke coming from downtown and appeared to be coming from near the Pentagon. And that was the first report we had heard in the squadron there of another attack, and we soon learned on the television that the Pentagon had also been attacked. It was a day unlike any, as many of you who were old enough to remember and can imagine. It was just unreal to think that these things were happening. But I was so proud of the men and women of the squadron, both the military and the civilians, and how they reacted. Stayed focused on our training, stayed focused on our commitment to our plans and what we knew that we had to be prepared to do. And it was an incredibly professional response that they put forth. In the days and weeks that came following, we were asked to take a considerable risk, to be innovative with our thinking. We were asked to put as many aircraft on 24/7 alert as possible. That meant bringing beds into the squadron, turning office space into bedroom space. That meant dining facilities, delivering meals to the squadron so that we could remain on klaxon alert and be ready to respond if called on to do so. Many long hours, many canceled PCSs, many canceled TDYs, many canceled leaves, and the people of the squadron responded in a heroic manner. It was a time in my career when I was truly proud to be a part of such a professional organization. Some of the missions that we performed on that day, you have O plans and you always plan and you train to be able to execute, but when things actually happen, they don't always go according to plan, and that's what we learned that day. We had a number of missions other than our O plans that we were asked to perform. We had put 3 aircraft in a holding pattern at Woods Corner, right over here by Branch Avenue, and we just had them circle and wait for the call to come in. We got a call from then Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Fogelsong, he called the desk, the mission control desk directly, and I spoke with him, and he said he wanted to relocate the air staff away from the Pentagon. And we sent those 3 aircraft from the holding pattern of Woods Corner to the east terrace of the Pentagon. And before he could get out of his office and make it down to the east terrace, the helicopters were there waiting for him and the rest of the staff. Several weeks later, Doc Vogelsong was coming through Andrews to get on a jet to fly somewhere, and in his style, he unannounced stopped into the helicopter squadron, and I heard the mission control officer call the belly crew attention. I went out there to see what was happening. It was General Doc Vogelsong. He had stopped in to gather all of our personnel together and just say thanks for the job that they did on 9/11. He was particularly impressed with our response time and our ability to be there before he could even get out of the building. Other things that we were asked to do, in addition to our normal plans, as you can imagine, there was a need for a considerable amount of medical supplies at the Pentagon. We were asked to ferry medical equipment from Malcolm Grove, the medical center that was here, to the Pentagon. So ambulance after ambulance came to the flight line. We loaded hundreds of pounds of medical supplies onto helicopters and flew them down to the Pentagon to assist with the recovery that was taking place there. At the end of the day, when I look back at it and I think about the new normal that we had to establish, life was never going to be the same that it was on the 10th of September. It was forever changed for us in that squadron as it was in every organization across the U.S. military. And through those long days and long nights, working many, many hours a day, many days of the week, sometimes every day of the week, in the days that came, I had occasion to be able to go back to the house for dinner and then come back to work. And on one occasion, several weeks after the attacks, I went to my house over on Columbus Circle here on base, and I got there just prior to 1700, and I heard the kids playing behind the house. We had a playground that was in the middle of the circle that backed up, and all the houses backed up to the playground. I heard the kids playing out there, and then I heard a pause and some silence as retreat sounded over the loud hailer system. So I came out of the kitchen and went to the sliding glass door where I could see what was going on in the back, and there were probably 12 to 14 kids out there, ages maybe 6 to 14 or so. And they had all stopped playing the pickup game of baseball that they were playing. They had turned toward the music, and they had put their hands on their heart. And I saw that, and in light of everything that was going on, I knew that we were going to be okay, and that we were going to get past this. And it was one of those moments where your eyes well with tears, and you know that these kids get it. They realize what's happened, and some of those young people are now in the military today. And I look out here at these young people, and I think of those kids that were on that playground and how they grew up to put on the uniform and stand a post the way that we did during my career. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and be able to tell a little bit about this story on that day. And thank you all for your time and for being here as well.
Thank you, Colonel Schaff, Lieutenant General Sasseville, and Colonel Ennis. Please welcome to the stage Lieutenant Colonel William Root from the 316th Wing.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the 1st Helicopter Squadron began a normal day. Crews woke up for alert, brief daily training flights, maintainers performed routine maintenance. No one suspected the world would change forever. On that day, the heli was called upon to execute its mission, one it has performed 24/7, 365 for over 50 years. Aircrew and aircraft not on alert that morning, rapidly ready for response. During the contingency response operations, utility helicopters provided an immediate and invaluable airlift asset. Every mission-capable aircraft was loaded with doctors, medics, and medical supplies. The speed and professionalism of the men and women of the 1st Helicopter Squadron was on display as all available assets were rushing into action. Aircrew furiously launched into an unknown while the world grappled with a new reality. Aircrew departed Joint Base Andrews that morning, and the familiar horizon was significantly changed. The iconic skyline of our nation's capital was obstructed by smoke and flames. America was under attack. While news, medevac, and police helicopters circled over downtown, our Hueys descended along low level along the Anacostia River. As they turned north on the Potomac, the growing smoke and flames silhouetted the National Mall. And finally, as they flew through the tidal basin, the devastating view of destruction at the Pentagon came into sight. Pilots identified the landing zones amidst the chaos and disarray, and after landing, they exited aircraft to help the professionals on board unload its vital emergency medical supplies. After hundreds of pounds of supplies and personnel were offloaded, crews returned to Andrews to continue to provide continuous support to first responders. On September 11th, 2001, the quiet professionals of the 1st Helicopter Squadron dutifully answered the nation's call and executed contingency response mission in support of the nation's capital. Ladies and gentlemen, please turn your attention to the skies behind me as 4 UH-1N Hueys
September 11th didn't just strike targets. The attack struck the hearts and fears of the entire nation. And our unit was equally affected. Some members were speechless. Some wanted to forget those. However, our members fell to multiple attacks. Our unit did not shrink from this heinous challenge. Our citizen airmen responded to our nation's call militarily, and some even responded in their civilian capacities. As the attacks unfolded the morning of 9/11, Joint Base Andrews entered ThreatCon Delta soon after. And while the base moved its higher threat condition, the 9th Operations Group and the 756th Airlift Squadron were actively transitioned to operational standing. Before the end of that day, the 756 had 2 complete crews and crew rests and an aircraft fully mission capable and ready to go. While the Pentagon was still burning but being brought under control by firefighters and first responders, 45 medical personnel entered that building as part of the post-attack response. Personnel provided aid and support to the injured and assisted in evacuations. In the days and weeks to follow, 43 members of the 459th Security Forces Squadron took on a voluntary activation to support the JBA host wing, the 89th Airlift Wing. And the squadron was later mobilized under Operation Noble Eagle in support of Homeland Defense and civil support missions. An additional 30 of the wing's members were called to active duty service for up to 2 years to support the host wing and fulfill air-based ground defense functions, guard mount, entry control, flight line security, vehicle searches, perimeter security, and ATV and walking patrols. They also took part in law enforcement patrols, physical security, and anti-terrorism investigation. They manned the law enforcement desk. They filled flight chief, gate supervisor, director of battle staff, and operations officer positions. And their combat arms training personnel also performed support duties for the host wing. At the Pentagon, 459th Aerospace Medicine Squadron Airmen provided support to the Pentagon's Dillon Windsor Clinic for 6 months. Meanwhile, the 756 Airlift Squadron deployed 4 members to Air Mobility Command's Tanker Airlift Control Center, where they augmented personnel assigned to the Homeland Emergency Response Cell. The 756 also took on AMC's Atlantic Express mission to free up AMC airlift assets for use in Homeland Defense, while also augmenting the 89th Airlift Wing to assist with the increased workload resulting from global war on terrorism commitments. And in the immediate months following September 11th, the 459 supported combat operations in Afghanistan by providing strategic airlift and aeromedical evacuation, supporting the processing and delivery of over 2 million humanitarian daily rations, and by assisting in the receipt of casualties at the port mortuary at Dover Air Force Base, Delaware. The 459th also participated in the transfer of captured Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters from Afghanistan to Naval Station Guantanamo Bay, and has participated in Operation Enduring Freedom from its beginning all the way through to its end. Now, ladies and gentlemen, turn your head to the sky as a
Please welcome to the stage Major Aaron Payomo from the 89th Airlift Wing.
In the wake of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, the 89th Airlift Wing played a critical role providing emergency response, command and control, and transportation for our nation's highest senior leaders. This continued in the days following, as the wing shifted to provide immediate support for the recovery effort. Most notably that day, the Presidential Airlift Group, flying the VC-25, also known as Air Force One, safely transported President George W. Bush back from Sarasota, Florida, diverting first to Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, and then to Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska, before returning to Joint Base Andrews that evening. This mission was pivotal in providing safety for the President of the United States, as well as the command, control, and communication necessary for our government during that horrific day. But the VC-25 was not the only 89th aircraft flying. The C-32, C-37, and the C-9 also played an important role in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. There were 2 C-32s flying on 9/11. One was transporting Secretary of State Colin Powell on an official visit to Peru, South America. After the attacks, Secretary Powell's return was delayed as all flights were grounded and America's borders were closed. Our C-32 safely returned him to Andrews the following day. The other C-32 was performing presidential support duties in Florida. This mission returned to Andrews immediately after President Bush cut short his visit to Florida. The 99th Airlift Squadron had only one mission on September 11th, which was a presidential support mission. However, their real impact came in the days following the terrorist attacks. On September 13th and 14th, the C-37 flew 5 missions transporting former United States Presidents Gerald Ford, George H.W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, and William Clinton to Washington, D.C. The squadron quickly mobilized and was able to ensure the 4 former presidents were able to provide counsel to then President George W. Bush. None of the C-9s from Andrews were on a mission on September 11th. However, the most significant mission following the attacks was supporting Joe Alba, the director of FEMA. Their mission supported his trip and the associated White House support to New York to survey the World Trade Center towers collapse. This crucially important mission was necessary for government officials to see the wreckage firsthand and allowed them to emphasize the monumental effort of support that would be required for New York in the following days, weeks, and months. The mission of the 89th Airlift Wing is to advance national interests by delivering diplomacy, safe, comfortable, reliable, connected, and protected. This was tested during 9/11, but for the 89th Airlift Wing, Sandbox Airmen were true to their heritage and worked as one synchronized team, enabling our country's senior leaders to withstand the shock and lead the nation through that fateful day.
Please welcome to the stage Lieutenant Colonel Michael Trujillo from the 113th Wing.
Good morning. The 121st Fighter Squadron, 113th Wing, DC Air National Guard, began training operations as normal on September 11th until word spread that a second aircraft had hit the World Trade Center. Authorized to launch multiple aircraft to patrol the airspace over the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., pilots Lieutenant Colonel Marc Sasseville and First Lieutenant Heather Penny did not know what awaited them as they flew into the airspace, with only their aircraft and no live weapons. They knew they may have to give their lives in order to protect others from another hijacked airliner in the sky. Flight 93 never made it to D.C., having crashed in a field in Pennsylvania, but the pilots continued to patrol the airspace, changing the mission from intercept to sanitizing airspace. Later in the day, F-16s, now armed with live ammunition, escorted President George W. Bush aboard Air Force One back to the White House. Following those events, the alert mission was stood up on September 12th and operates 24/7, 365 days a year to ensure a no-fail mission of protecting the airspace over Washington, D.C. Turning your eyes skyward, you will see a pair of F-16s from the 113th Aerospace Control Alert Detachment executing that solemn responsibility today.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Root, Major Smith, Major Payomo, and Lieutenant Colonel Trujillo.
First responders, attention! Reason, mark!
This concludes our ceremony. Thank you for attending. We kindly ask that you expeditiously exit the tarmac as the flight line needs to be secured.